Washington's linebackers have been a point of contention among fans for many years at this point, and this room looks like it has a lot of potential. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome all you everydayers out there to yet another episode of Locked On Huskies. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. We write for Sports Illustrated and Fan Nation's Inside the Huskies. You can find all our work at si.com/college/Washington. We appreciate all you everydayers out there tuning in. We've got a lot to talk about today. We're going to talk about the linebackers, but really quick, I want to remind everybody that today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. Go to birddogs.com/LockedOnCollege or enter promo code LockedOnCollege for a free white tech hat with any purchase. You won't want to take your Bird Dogs off. We promise you. Lars, we've got a lot to talk about today. This linebacker room is really, really exciting. And today we're going to talk about Edefuan Ulofoshio, who today, Tuesday, as we're recording this, Kalen DeBoer announced is going to be one of the team's 4 captains for the 2023 season, along with Michael Penix, Roma Dunze, and Braylon Trice. And it was something where I was talking to our editor over at Inside the Huskies, Dan Raley, as we were walking off the field today after Kalen DeBoer's press conference, where just real quick kind of housekeeping thing that we will address on future episodes is running back Cam Davis and offensive lineman guard Memelar have been ruled out for the entire season with different injuries that Kalen DeBoer did announce today as we're recording this on Tuesday. And as we were just kind of walking off the field, we kind of took a look at Edefuan Ulofoshio, who has just really just improved physically so much over the last couple of years after struggling with injuries. And what Dan said to me is he just kind of said, just looked at me and goes, man, he looks like he's a 5-year NFL linebacker already at this point. And even though he's, 5th-year player at the college level. And it's something where, I look at him and I say, that guy's going to lead the conference in tackles this year.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that's the thing to remember is the fact that Eddie wasn't healthy at the start of last season, so Washington went into the 2022 season without their true leader. Not to knock off Alphonzo Tuputala, who I'm sure we'll talk about later, but Eddie has kind of been proven he is the heart and soul of this defense, especially at the middle linebacker position and the way this defense is structured. It really does come down to the linebackers setting both the front and setting up the back end. So Eddie has been a huge part in this defense, and this fall camp, I remember asking Kalen DeBoer about it last week, where he said, yeah, Eddie was in my office an hour and a half after practice, just wanting to watch film, just talking, just being that guy. And I think that's what you want as a leader. And there's certain guys who can do that. And Eddie has proven in his time at Washington, he is that guy.
No, absolutely. And that's something where if you've ever talked to anybody who's been around him for an extended period of time, I believe he roomed it with Roma Dunze at one point. Oh, no, sorry. It was Dominic Hampton, who was like, oh yeah, this dude just watches film 24/7. And we're always talking about it. We're always just discussing whatever we see on the film. And it's just something where, yeah, it's like you said, that's exactly what you want to see in a leader. So, props to him for being named captain and being fully healthy. We kind of saw the impact that he can have on the defense towards the end of last year. Obviously, he played, just kind of sparing snaps in the Oregon and Oregon State games when he first came back at the end of 2022. But as we kind of saw his progression ramp up, he just became more and more impressive every single week.
Yeah, and I think that the thing with Eddie was there's no doubt about his on the field play. It's does he understand the defense? Because this is a different defense than what Jimmy Lake and Pete Kwiatkowski ran. So there is a lot of kind of mental nuance to it, and I think actually it kind of helped him being on the sideline last year and watching kind of how guys were going about it, watching guys during drills. I remember talking to William Inge, we'll talk about later, last year when he said Eddie's still basically just as much involved, if not more, even though he's hurt. So he's not doing it on the field, but he was picking up everything, and I think that allowed him to kind of be able to get on the field for a limited amount, but still play just as well because of the understanding he has. And I think that even more so is going to help him in 2023.
No, it's exactly that. And one thing that, I know that you just kind of touched on it, but just expanding a little bit more is one of the things the coaching staff said about him last year while he was injured was he wanted to learn all the signals so that he could just be one of those leaders, not just on the field, but on the sideline as well. And that was really, really interesting to just kind of listen to, because if for anybody who loves college football, one of the most fun things to do sometimes between plays is just watch the players on the sidelines who are calling the signals, because it's just for from the outsider's perspective, just a bunch of random arm motions, which are incredibly hilarious to watch without any context, but it's just its own nuanced language. And it was something that somebody who I was really high on in the linebacker room last year, who didn't really necessarily ever come to fruition to his fullest potential, was Chris Moll, a transfer from UAB. Was a super fun player to watch, but one thing that William Inge, linebackers coach and co-defensive coordinator, would say quite frequently is that he doesn't have the signals. The signals are not there yet, and we can't fully trust him until he fully understands the language of this defense. And that's something where, obviously, if you're going to be named captain, that, yeah, you fully have that down. But this is a guy who, even before he got hurt in 2021, was somebody who was just relied upon and looked at as one of these leaders. And I really don't think that his impact on the defense this year, especially with how much they struggled to tackle at times last year, can be overstated enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where Washington struggled last year, to your exact point, was the second and third level with tackling. Because, I mean, there were so many times, I can think back to Oregon State going against Martinez, where they had him corralled 2 or 3 yards behind the line of scrimmage, then all of a sudden he's going off for a 9-yard gain. It's like, wait a minute, how is this happening? Eddie wasn't really a part of that. Again, he started to come back towards the end of last season, but he wasn't a key player. Whereas this season, there's no way he's going to allow that to happen, because Eddie's been one of the more surefire tacklers in his career at Washington. And actually, he was a pretty good pass rusher in his very, very limited role in doing it. When they did send him, he went full send. He was going. And I think that's going to be a huge difference in 23 as well.
No, you're right, because that's one thing that you can also think about whenever you do think about just having him on the field, is just that threat that he's going to blitz at any time. And we've talked about how smart he is and how he knows how to hit these gaps really well, which kind of speaks double when you talk about a blitzing linebacker, because that can change everything. This coaching staff loves to show double A gap pressure, and then sometimes have linebackers drop off, and they do a lot of different things just along the defensive line, and linebackers can be super helpful with that. And that's something where if Eddie can show this double A gap pressure and either drop off, because he's really impressive in coverage as well. He's one of the better all-around linebackers in the country, in my opinion, but he just hasn't really had a chance to show it because he struggled through these injuries. And if he's fully healthy, he changes this defense in so many different ways.
And I think that's, to your point, I think that's kind of how they've been able to keep him healthy, was develop the depth that we'll talk about later. But I think, you still want him to get enough reps to where he feels confident enough in the scheme. And I think that they've done a perfect job of that this fall, where we've seen plenty of rotation at that linebacker position, and even having, Ralen Goforth, I'm sure we'll talk about later, next to Alphonzo Tuputala, because they want to have as many guys as possible be that Eddie. And nobody can be Eddie, but they want enough guys that if Eddie has to come out for a couple of plays or maybe a series or two, that they don't have a drop-off. Because to your point earlier, that's where the drop-off happened last year, where if you have Alphonzo and Carson, who can actually pretty much lay the lumber next to anybody in this room, but then you had Chris Moll, and it was like, okay, he's good, he's okay, he's serviceable, maybe he's better on special teams. He wasn't exactly what they needed as a linebacker. So I think this year, having Eddie at the top next to Alphonzo has allowed that depth to be like, hey, you know what, now we're stacked 1 through 6.
No, you're right. And I really think that Eddie is starting to get just totally comfortable in the defense. And you know what's else is really comfortable? Bird dogs. Bird dogs, I can't really say enough good things about them. They make you look good. The stretch khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg and give you a truly sculpted look. And I could say the same thing about their joggers, which I'm actually wearing right now. They're so comfortable, and they really do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but they fit you way better. They stretch better than regular shorts, and usually those shorts are made of stiff, restricted cotton that aren't nearly as great. And I know I've talked about them a lot, and I love wearing them to practice, which, I did today. And they just are really helpful. The pockets are really nice and deep. And, if you want to get a pair, you can go to birddogs.com/lockdowncollege or enter the promo code lockdowncollege for a free white tech hat with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockdowncollege or promo code lockdowncollege for a free white tech hat. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. We promise you that. Now, Lars, I think it's time to jump into the backups a little bit, because we'll talk about Alphonzo Tuputala, and he deserves his love because he's just such a solid all-around player. But one thing that really interests me when you look at the second stringers in Carson Bruener and Ralen Goforth is just kind of the different combinations of skills that these two guys bring to the room. Because you think about Carson Bruener, he's somebody who, while the long speed isn't necessarily as impressive as it might have been in high school, it's still there. And he's a guy who can just play pass coverage really well. We saw him be a sure tackler when he was asked to in 2021 at different spurts. And Ralen Goforth is just kind of that downhill thumper who definitely can't necessarily provide the same edge in pass coverage, but as a run defender and somebody who, you play him on the strong side of the field on the short side, he's somebody who can make a big impact, especially in the run game.
Yeah, and he's kind of been a guy almost similar to Eddie, where they're 5-year veterans. Ralen Goforth was a 4-year guy at USC. Ralen's coming with that same mindset that Eddie has, where, hey, I know my job now. I want to learn the entire defense. Because, again, we're getting back to this whole thing about depth. You have to have guys that can step in at a moment's notice and deliver the exact same result that the starters are. It's very hard to do, but I think that's also why you go into the portal and get a fifth-year transfer in Ralen Goforth, because and they did the same thing with Chris Moore last year. I think Ralen is certainly better than Chris was when he came in, and I think that's going to show this fall because, again, Ralen is a guy who took out Cam Rising in the Pac-12 championship game.
Viral hit.
If you don't know who Ralen Goforth is, just type in Ralen Goforth Utah and enjoy your afternoon, because it was an incredible hit. And I think that's kind of what Washington needed last year in the reserves, was that thumper, was that, and Carson also did at times provide it, but that was more on special teams. Carson was more or less laying guys out on special teams, wasn't necessarily doing it on defense. I think Ralen's a guy where you can just plug and play that second string and just let him go off.
No, that's a great point. And it's something where I like to think about Carson, because it's something where he hasn't necessarily developed the way that Husky fans hoped he would when he was coming out of Redmond High School, but he's still a really talented player and fills a very just, I don't really, the best term I would say is just necessary fit, where it's, yeah, he's not necessarily going to give you 70 to 80 tackles over the course of the season, but he's going to give you 45 or 50, and they're going to be all quality tackles where it's, oh yeah, like Eddie or Alphonzo just needs to come out for a couple of plays. I think he'll be the first guy off the bench, not really Goforth, because he's just a little bit more of the guy where, we talk about 3-down running backs all the time. He's a 3-down linebacker kind of guy, where he's not the most powerful or necessarily kind of people mover that you think about in the run game, but he's somebody who can drop back into pass coverage much better than Goforth can, just from, looking at their film side by side. And it's something where you just kind of watch and see what he's done throughout his UW career. And you just say, yeah, with the way that they try to provide pressure up front sometimes and need somebody who can truly roam the middle of the field. That's not Goforth, in my opinion. That's Bruener.
No, I completely agree. I also think kind of in that same vein, it kind of helps these younger guys having veterans that they can learn from, not just Eddie or Alphonzo, but also, I'm sure Ralen's teaching a lot of these guys similar things, that it's kind of like, okay, maybe they don't need to see the field, but you still want to have that knowledge in the room. And I think Carson is kind of showing in fall camp, to your point, hey, I'm picking up everything from these guys. And I think if he can put it all together, Washington's going to be a real special place when it comes to linebackers.
Not in any kind of a way of a knock of Alphonzo Tuputala, more in just kind of a transition, really. Do you think that either of them could unseat him as a starter at any point this year?
I think Carson, to your point, probably has maybe more of an inside chance to, because I think you don't want to have 2 5th years next to each other. I think you kind of want to have a little bit of gap between, just from an experience and style sort of standpoint. I think Carson would be the one, to your point, to unseat Alphonzo, just because of his ability in pass coverage. I think that's kind of where he separates himself a little bit more. Alphonzo could get better in pass coverage. I don't doubt that. But I think right now I'd probably give the slight edge to Carson in that regard. So I think that's kind of where maybe on third downs and passing downs, he can kind of play that hybrid role.
No, I like that a lot, because that's something that I think about a lot when it comes to not just Alphonzo Tuputala, but just what this defense needs to do to help this team live up to expectations this year. And the number one thing, and it's just kind of glaringly obvious, especially if you turn on the film from the Oregon game, is they need to tackle. And I think that Alphonzo Tuputala is a really solid tackler. And we just kind of saw at especially many points, again, I know I have to keep referencing the Oregon game, because that's just kind of everything that you want to highlight from not just the best of what this defense could be, but the worst of it as well, is all on film in that game. And it's something where you think about what Alphonzo can bring against the run. Yeah, he's a guy who can play any gap. He can get to the outside if needed, because he has that speed and he is a sure tackler. But if he ends up getting getting blocked. It's something where I think the safeties will be better in terms of tackling this year. That's really what it is. This team needs to tackle if they want to win the Pac-12 and if they want to make it to the college football playoff. And I think they can. And I think a lot of that is going to end up falling on the starters, but I feel like I'm just kind of contradicting myself when I say this, but it needs to fall on the backups as well. This room needs to tackle. And I think they're doing a better job of that from what we've seen in brief live reps, but I know it's totally different when you get another team out there. But it really is that. And of course, the coaching staff has seen the film. They know that this is something that needs to happen. And I think that really is going to end up starting with Ulofoshio, because he's just going to bring a different energy to this room and a different just presence on the field, where if teams are going to just say, oh, we can't run it that side of the field because we know that guy's going to clean it up. I think that it could end up being a really big year for Goforth or Bruener or Tuputala or whoever is on the other side of the field at that time.
No doubt. And I think the other thing to factor into it when we talked about Eddie as a pass rusher, how his presence also forces running backs to have to run outside of the boundaries, and you're running right into ZTF and Braylon. So we go back to this whole point. Eddie is the glue guy of this defense, because without Eddie, you can feel more confident in running up the C gap and B gap up the middle and trying to go against Carson Bruener and Alphonzo Tuputala. Again, we're not knocking them per se, but I think Eddie just brings a different level of, I don't want to say intimidation, but just kind of, you have to game plan around him, where I'm not sure necessarily anybody's game planning around Alphonzo Tuputala. That could change the season, and he could learn from Eddie and pick up and maybe take a next step. But I think at least going into the season, that's what separates Eddie from the rest of this room.
No, I like that a lot. And it's something where the one thing that does kind of scare me is the depth. And it's not that any of these players aren't talented. It's that a couple of injuries could totally derail this room, because you look behind these four guys right here, and it's Drew Fowler, who's a walk-on who did have some solid offers. He was offered by UCLA. I believe Utah and Louisville also extended offers, and he chose to walk on at Washington because he's a local guy, and props to him for that. But then behind that, it's true freshmen. And you can say a lot of good things, and we will in the next segment, about Deven, Bryant, and Jordan Whitney, but they're true freshmen. And that's still something that's kind of concerning.
Yeah, I was going to say, you never want to get – I mean, we saw what happened in the secondary last season when you had to play true freshmen. Again, not that Javion Green can eventually be a good guy, but you just don't want to put your freshman in that situation, because it's never going to be a good outcome. And I think, to your point, yes, maybe you want to get them probably 3 or 4 games. You want to get them in the speed of college football, but you want that in the third and fourth quarter when the game's already in hand. You don't want to have to rely on them going into the 2 deeps against, let's say, Utah or Oregon, where it's like, wait a minute, now I'm not necessarily as confident about our unit as I was going into the season.
Speaking of Javion Green, make sure everybody that you all you everydayers out there, tune in tomorrow when we are going to be breaking down the defensive backs, because there's a whole lot to talk about there. Now, switching gears here a little bit, it's time to talk about for all of our YouTube viewers out there, and who are looking at the graphic and watching us. Hi, first of all. Second of all, I know that was corny. I'm sorry. I feel like I had to get that in there. Second thing is I titled the segment "The William Inge Effect," and I want to talk about this because there are multiple ways to talk about it. The first is just kind of the different angle that he's brought to this room, and his philosophy of guys that he's recruiting, and guys that we'll talk about the 2023 commits. We'll talk about the guys, or 2023 signees, 2024 commits. There's a whole lot to like, and you kind of see what his angle is in the room. And it kind of shows it in just kind of what this room has turned into on the field too, where there's, for many different reasons, it didn't necessarily work out the way that he might have wanted it to in 2022. But one thing that you look at when you watch that film is you see the vision and you see what he wanted to do. And I think that they're going to do a better job of executing that in 2023.
No. I think one thing to factor in with William Inge is the style that he brings, to your point. He's from the Big Ten. He's an Iowa guy. So I think that's kind of the way that he likes to have his linebackers be physical, but also be athletic and kind of go sideline to something. You need to be able to do a mixture of things. And I think last season he truly didn't have that, especially with not having Eddie at the start of the season. So I think now having Eddie, because he knew what Eddie was coming into the season when you got to watch him and just being around him in practice. But until you get to watch him play on Saturdays, it's a little bit different. And I think when William Inge got to see him, it's like, whoa, wait a minute, this is a guy I can work with. We can do a lot of things with this. And so now coming into the season when you have an entire room healthy and William Inge has got an entire offseason with these guys both in spring and fall camp to say, hey, this is what I want from you. And I get to see you every day in practice go and we can try and communicate and maybe fix some things that are not working. That's what's going to separate this defense in the first couple months of the season is the fact that they're going to be so much further ahead from an understanding perspective when it comes to the scheme than they were at any point last year.
No, that's so much of that. And then I also just the speed aspect is really what I wanted to focus on personally, because you watch Deven and Bryant and Jordan Whitney, the two who are true freshmen who were Deven Bryant enrolled early. Jordan Whitney got here in the summer. And there are two guys where you watch them and you say, wow, okay, these guys are both really impressive. Whitney has some really impressive athletic numbers. Deven Bryant was the leader of the St. John Bosco defense, which I kind of feel like speaks for itself. And then you look at another commit that they have in the class 2024, Kamori House. You look at all three of those guys and you say, wow, they're really athletic. They have a ton of range. They have a ton of speed and they hit and they tackle really, really well. And it's really tough to find that full package in a linebacker at the high school level sometimes, but he does a really great job of, and I know this is something that we've hit on other shows, is talent evaluation. He does a really great job of that, of scoping out guys and just saying, I'm not really going to just go after anybody. I'm not just going to say, oh, this is the highest ranked guy, I'm going to go after him. It's this guy fits what I want to run on the defense. And I think, and no disrespect to Deven Bryant, I think Whitney and Kamori House kind of emulate that more than Bryant does. Bryant is just a really solid all-around player, and he's got great leadership skills. He's a really good tackler, but Kamori House is one of the most impressive athletes I've seen in a long time at the linebacker position. You look at his speed. He plays basically outside linebacker / edge rusher for St. John Bosco, and they're going to move him inside, and he's just displays great range, great pass coverage ability. And it's something where you just say, yeah, I know I said it earlier, I see the vision of what he wants to do with this defense. And this, just the future and the room that he's building really does just say, okay, yeah, this is going to be a room full of rangy linebackers with speed that are going to tackle really well and are going to be excellent in pass coverage.
Yeah, I remember talking to William Inge about a couple of weeks ago, and he said the two things we look for are leadership and production. You take all three of those guys, and then you also look at the older guys in the room. That's the two words that all those guys epitomize in some way or form. Either they have leadership or they have production. Eddie's a guy who's got both. Alphonzo's kind of that next guy who has both. Kamori, to your point, I think is going to be in that Eddie mold where it's like, hey, he's just going to do it all. Deven, I think, he's further back than that, but I think he could get to that point maybe 2-3 years down the line. But I think to the point of what we're getting at, again, with this whole thing, you got to have depth. You can't just have one of them. You don't want to have one Chris House, but then 3 walk-ons. You need to have guys that say, hey, you know what? Come in, earn your spot. If you can't, you'll be on special teams, make an impact there, and you'll get on the field on defense. So I think that the staff has kind of structured it to where, you know what, no matter what, we're going to get the right guys in the building, and we're going to play them at the right time and in the right positions, and that's going to be perfect moving forward.
And that's something where, you know, I kind of want to go back and touch on Deven Bryant because he did enroll early, and we saw him be very impressive at times in the spring where he's not somebody who I feel that this team is going to rely on this fall. Maybe he'll get into a couple blowouts. You could say that about a lot of this true freshman class. But he's somebody who I really do want to see take the field at some point this season just to see where he is. Because the one thing that, you know, you kind of look at some of these linebackers where they're undersized one way or another, where, yeah, there's this whole old prototypical mold of you want these guys to be 6'3", 6'4", 240 pounds, where both linebackers that they brought in Whitney and Bryant for the class 2023 are a little bit undersized. They're 6 foot, 6'1" maybe, but they're just stout. They're really, really stout, really, really strong. And it's something where I just wonder how is he going to look at the college level? And with Bryant especially, it's something where, you know, playing in the Trinity League, a lot of those guys are going to be playing high-level Division I football. So that's a really good indicator of what he's just going to just do at the next level. But, of course, it's a whole different thing once you just kind of get up to the speed of the college game.
Well, not only that, but I want to see him next year when he's in Rob McKeefrey's system for an entire year plus. So, you know, I want to see him next spring because, yeah, I get to your point. It is actually very important that he came in the spring and was able to get acclimated as quick as possible into the offseason program and kind of just learn the defense. But I don't think we're going to see the true fruits of that labor until next spring. And I guarantee you he's going to add about 5 to 10 pounds. He's going to look a lot bigger. And I think at that point, we're going to have a lot better idea of how can he make an impact on this team. And also, to a point, when Kamori enrolls, how far is that gap between those two, and how quickly can Deven close that gap?
I really don't think that it's going to take him long to do that either, because you look at him and you look at Whitney, because that's one of the tough things that you need to keep in mind as a fan of this team is both Ulofoshio and Goforth are gone after this year. This is it for them. They're both out of eligibility. So there's definitely at least one player, maybe two, coming in through the portal, like we saw in the before the 2022 season with Cam Bright and Chris Mull both coming in. Is the portal is going to be open, and this is going to be, and it's something where I think that they're never not going to take a portal linebacker, because it's just something where, yeah, if we can have somebody come in, play right away, we get these 2024 guys up to speed and maybe see what we have in the 2023 guys, just working them into the rotation, that's going to be really, really important for just this team moving forward, because that just feels like one of the plug and play positions where, you talk about running back on the offensive side, where we can just take a running back in the portal every year, just throw them in there, see what happens. Well, we kind of evaluate some of these younger guys in a second year in the system, where it's kind of the same on defense with the linebackers, because it's somebody where, maybe they're not necessarily going to start like Ralen Goforth, but there's somebody who's going to be very important. Like Cam Bright was very important to the defense last year. You can spend a significant amount of time arguing about the impact that he made, but it's something where the coaching staff really relied on him a lot last year. And there's definitely just kind of some points last year where you look at Bright and you say, okay, it just kind of looks like they're waiting for Ulofoshio to get back to see how he's going to impact the defense as well. But you just kind of look forward and say, yeah, this looks like it's going to be a portal position with, maybe an incumbent playing next to him, and this guy's going to rotate in a lot. And I feel like there are a lot of questions moving forward to the linebacker position.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, to your point, if you think about it, you just look on paper next year, who would it be? Carson Bruener and Tuputala as your starting linebackers. It's not the worst starting linebacker duo, but I think to your point, that's why you always want, because again, behind them would be what? Deven Bryant and Drew Fowler. I think
Jordan Whitney, yeah.
Or Jordan Whitney. But again, now we're talking about redshirt freshmen playing. I mean, you want them to play. But I don't
absolutely.
think you necessarily want to count on them as your second string linebackers against next season is going to be Indiana, Ohio State, Michigan, when you go into the Big Ten. Because again, not to discredit the Pac-12, but I think we all know you can kind of get away with that a little bit more when you're playing Cal, when you're playing Oregon State, when you're playing Washington State, for example. You're not going to get away with that when you're playing Ohio State and the likes of the other Big Ten schools that they're going to be going up against in 24 and beyond. So I think, to your point, you're going to want to get a veteran, experienced guy who, no matter how much he plays, whether he is a Goforth and he's a second stringer, that's still veteran leadership.
Yes,
you can't replicate that. And I think, and both Tuputala and Carson say, hey, you know what? I have no problem if you bring a veteran here, and if I lose some snaps, but we're winning, who cares? I think that's the character of this team. Is like, look, even Eddie said that. Even Eddie said, I don't care if I'm necessarily on the field a ton. If we're winning, I don't care. I'm good with that. I don't need to get all this. If I'm getting 80 snaps a game and we're losing, I don't want that. So I think it's a credit to how William Inge has built the room of the character and say, hey, you know what? We're just going to get as many guys in here as possible that have the ability to play, and whoever rises to the top rises to the top.
No, I like that a lot. And then just kind of as we wrap up here, the one thing I wanted to just kind of touch on is you called Eddie the glue guy earlier. I feel like the linebacker is just kind of the glue position for this Husky defense as a whole, because since Ben Burkervin left, Eddie had his moments in 2019, but since Ben Burkervin left, we've seen this Washington defense still fall off in some ways. Yeah, the pass coverage has still been great, but as a run team, just as defending the run, this team has been subpar for the most part. Last year, they were a little bit better, but that's because they were getting thrown on so much. So, semantics a little bit. But it's something where this team has been searching for just kind of that marquee linebacker for a long time, where it's, oh man, this guy is, we can't run at him. We can't really throw in his direction. That's just kind of that middle of the field demon that can do it all. And I think that if Eddie can bring that presence this year, that it's going to go a really, really long way towards improving this defense and helping them get towards the college football playoff.
No, it's exactly. And even if he's not able to, you have enough depth behind him to where it's not going to be an issue, I think. Whereas last year, you didn't have necessarily the depth that you want. I think now you have the experience, the veterans, the guys that have done it in this scheme, and everyone knows what the job is. They just have to go out and execute.
I couldn't have said it any better myself. Now, Lars, I want to thank you for being here with me today, as always. Really appreciate it. And we appreciate all you everydayers out there listening. Make sure you tune in tomorrow when we're going to just talk about the defensive backs, just get a nice little breakdown on the cornerbacks and the safeties. We're going to lump them into one. And be sure you like, comment, subscribe on YouTube, wherever else you get your podcasts. We want to thank you again so much for listening. Drop a 5-star review. We really appreciate it. Follow us on Twitter, wherever else you get your podcasts or content. See you tomorrow.